That's right. That's a way to know the environment. Let's polka.
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
When the remains of the IL-18 were finally identified in 1999, buried under a collapsed ridge of permafrost, as if the terrain itself had swallowed it, investigators immediately noted one impossible detail. The fuselage showed no signs of a high-impact collision. Instead, the aircraft looked as though it had been carefully lowered or guided into the ice, its wings intact, its landing gear half deployed, frozen exactly in place. Emergency systems had not been activated, no distress signals recorded, and the flight's black box was missing, replaced by a patch of scorched insulation that looked more like a deliberate removal than a mechanical failure. The official archive from 1972 mentioned severe weather, but meteorological logs from that day, obtained decades later, showed completely clear airspace along the aircraft's planned route. What could not be explained were the course deviations noted on the original radar tapes, for abrupt shifts in heading, each at nearly perfect right angles, each lasting no more than 30 seconds before the plane returned to its standard path as though nothing had occurred. Aviators described the pattern as externally forced adjustments, something impossible for the IL-18's analog autopilot. These deviations align precisely with the repeated coordinates found in the flight engineer's notebook, the ones scribbled across several torn pages with increasing pressure, as if he wrote them in fear or in trance. When rescuers first viewed the cockpit in 1999, they found the engineer's seatbelt unlatched, his tools packed, and a pen still wedged in the dashboard, pointing directly at the location of those coordinates on an old map. The logs from the 1972 search mission included dozens of anomalies, radio interference spikes, compass oscillations, and reports of a distant droning sound that several helicopter crews heard but could not localize. Yet most of these entries were overwritten, replaced with generic notes about visibility and fuel checks. Someone had gone through the reports meticulously, erasing anything that hinted at electronic interference or external signals. Local hunters later told journalists that on the night of the disappearance they saw lights moving low across the tundra, silent and smooth, not like aircraft, not like flares, drifting slowly until they faded behind the ridge where the IL-18 was eventually found. Those testimonies never made it into the official narrative, but they matched an internal memo sent to the Ministry of Civil Aviation in 1972, referring to unidentified luminous activity, recorded by a remote weather station in the same region. Whatever drew the IL-18 off course had left fingerprints across decades of documents, overwritten, minimized, or quietly removed, but never fully erased. As forensic teams examined the cabin interior, they discovered something even more disturbing. Every passenger seatbelt was unfastened, every life jacket untouched, and every emergency compartment sealed. No luggage was scattered, no signs of panic or evacuation were present, and no evidence suggested that passengers had attempted to brace for impact. It was as if the aircraft had landed empty, a silent shell of metal placed deliberately in the middle of the tundra. Traces of skin cells, hair, or bodily fluids were shockingly absent, to the point where the team considered contamination or sabotage. But after multiple independent tests, the conclusion held: the plane contained no biological remains at all. What puzzled analysts further were the faint circular scorch marks, found along the floor panels near the rear exit, shaped like thin rings, uniform in diameter, as if something had been positioned there repeatedly and lifted away. These marks corresponded eerily with the coordinates from the flight engineer's notes, as though he had been tracking an onboard presence or signal that pulsed throughout the cabin. A declassified Soviet air defense document from late 1972 mentioned an unscheduled radar contact, moving at impossible altitude shifts in the exact air corridor the IL-18 crossed. But the entry was later crossed out in red ink, with a margin note reading, "Instrument error, omit from record." Years later, when digital scans of the radar logs leaked online, enthusiasts reconstructed a faint ghost trace shadowing the IL-18's path from the moment its first deviation occurred. The trace maintained a precise 2.1 kilometer distance at all times, adjusting instantly whenever the IL-18 changed course. According to retired traffic controllers, no known aircraft from that era could mimic such behavior. Adding to the mystery, fragments of an unknown polymer were found embedded in the cockpit instrument panel, material resistant to extreme cold and showing properties not used in Soviet manufacturing. Under magnification, the polymer displayed microscopic channels resembling circuitry, suggesting it was part of a device or casing forcibly removed. A Yakut geologist revealed that shortly after the wreck's discovery in 1999, unmarked vehicles arrived to secure the site, and teams wearing no insignia conducted night operations around the fuselage, digging beneath it and removing several sealed containers. For weeks afterward, locals reported intermittent low-frequency vibrations emanating from the mountainside, accompanied by short bursts of static that disrupted shortwave radios. Each incident was logged unofficially by local law enforcement, but never forwarded to federal authorities. Everything pointed toward the same unsettling implication. The IL-18's disappearance had not been a random aviation tragedy, but the result of an encounter, or interception, by something capable of controlling its trajectory. In early 2000, after the first photographs of the rediscovered IL-18 leaked to aviation forums, a team of private analysts studying the wreck noticed something the official reports avoided mentioning entirely: a thin, almost invisible layer of metallic dust coating the inner walls of the aircraft. Samples taken discreetly by a Yakut technician were later analyzed at a university lab in Novosibirsk, revealing that the dust contained isotopic ratios not found in any known Soviet alloy of the 1970s. Instead, the composition resembled materials used in high-energy research experiments, specifically those involving directed electromagnetic fields. The discovery reignited interest in the coordinates repeatedly scribbled in the flight engineer's notebook, which, when plotted on a modern map, corresponded not to any terrain feature, but to a point several hundred meters above ground level, essentially a fixed position in the sky. This fueled theories that the crew encountered an aerial phenomenon, maintaining a stable position relative to the aircraft, forcing the deviations observed on radar. Further investigation into archived communication logs exposed a curious detail. At the exact moments of each course deviation, a brief but measurable distortion appeared in shortwave frequencies, monitored by a nearby military outpost. These distortions formed a repeating pattern, one that mathematicians later identified as a near-perfect harmonic series, something highly unlikely to emerge from natural atmospheric interference. When the IL-18's cockpit clock was recovered, frozen at a time inconsistent with the flight's projected timeline, experts noticed that the clock's internal mechanism was intact but magnetically realigned, as if exposed to a sudden, intense electromagnetic pulse. A retired avionics technician stated that only a highly localized field, far stronger than anything an aircraft of that era could generate, could cause such realignment, without frying the rest of the circuitry. Meanwhile, locals recounted how, during the search efforts in 1972, the night sky above the ridge occasionally flickered with silent flashes of bluish light, lasting only a fraction of a second, too bright to be auroras, and unlike any known aircraft beacon. One hunter described seeing a column of air shimmering like heat above asphalt, forming and collapsing instantly. Though dismissed at the time, his account matched atmospheric anomalies reported in declassified files from other regions, where unexplained aerial encounters occurred. The closer investigators looked, the more it appeared that the IL-18 had been interacting with something capable of manipulating both its electrical systems and its physical trajectory. But the question remained, why remove the passengers? Why return an empty aircraft? A theory began to form among independent researchers that the plane's occupants were not taken from it, but rather phased out by the same mechanism that distorted its instruments. By 2004, a consortium of independent researchers had amassed enough anomalies surrounding the IL-18 to question whether the aircraft's reappearance was accidental at all. Satellite data from the late 1990s, re-evaluated with modern image enhancement tools, revealed a temporary depression in the permafrost near the crash site, a symmetrical, bowl-shaped indentation inconsistent with avalanche activity or natural melt patterns. The shape matched known imprints documented in Cold War files where unidentified descending objects were reported but dismissed. Even more perplexing was the discovery of a second depression, smaller and partially filled with snow, located precisely along the bearing from which the aircraft would have approached, suggesting that an object had not only descended, but also taken off again within a very short time frame. Analysts began comparing electromagnetic readings from old geological surveys, and identified a surge near the site on the exact week the IL-18 disappeared, an anomaly so intense it had forced a remote mining station's equipment offline. No such surge occurred again until February 1999, just weeks before the aircraft resurfaced under the ice. At that moment, seismic sensors across Yakutia recorded a subtle but distinct vibration wave, not consistent with earthquakes but with something imparting a directional impulse from above. During the same period, a hunter camped several kilometers away reported a ringing in the air, a high-frequency oscillation, that made metal objects in his backpack vibrate. The man later claimed he saw a moving shadow pass across the moonlit snow, enormous in size yet completely noiseless. When he approached authorities with his story, he was advised to avoid discussing unusual phenomena, a phrase identical to warnings issued during earlier classified aerospace investigations. Meanwhile, forensic reconstruction of the IL-18's interior uncovered microfractures on several aluminum panels, fractures showing signs of molecular shear rather than physical bending, as though the metal had been briefly destabilized at a structural level. This effect was known to occur in laboratories experimenting with high-frequency resonance fields. Adding further intrigue, a previously unknown logbook page surfaced from the effects of a deceased air traffic controller. A handwritten note made minutes after the IL-18 vanished from radar, stating simply, "Target split, 2 returns, 1 fading upward." The upward fading return did not correlate with any known flight path. Taken together, the evidence hinted at the involvement of a system or entity operating with precision far beyond conventional aviation. The scenario that emerged was increasingly unsettling. Something intercepted the IL-18, altered its physical environment, removed its occupants through unknown means, and later returned the aircraft, either malfunctioning, incomplete, or intentionally abandoned, leaving investigators to untangle a puzzle. As investigators pushed deeper into the IL-18 case, attention shifted toward the repeating coordinates found in the flight engineer's notebook. Numbers rewritten dozens of times, sometimes over older ink as if correcting themselves, yet always returning to the same sequence. When converted using a less common geodetic format used by Soviet survey teams in the early 1970s, the coordinates align not with a fixed ground location, but with a moving point tracing an arc across the upper atmosphere, roughly 60 to 70 kilometers above Earth. This trajectory matched no known satellite orbit of the period, and when analysts compared the coordinates to declassified missile early warning logs, they found brief unidentified returns along that same arc, on the night the IL-18 vanished. These returns displayed zero velocity relative to Earth's rotation, impossible for any conventional craft, but consistent with something holding a stationary position in the mesosphere. A retired aerospace mathematician reviewing the data noted that the pattern resembled a controlled descent corridor, one that might allow an object to drop straight down with minimal atmospheric disturbance. This theory gained weight when scratches on the IL-18's fuselage, previously assumed to be impact damage, were re-examined under microscopy and found to be parallel microabrasions consistent with contact from ionized particles. Such abrasions have only been documented in high-altitude test vehicles exposed to artificially generated plasma fields. The implications were staggering. The aircraft may have passed through an energy layer, not naturally occurring in the region. A diary entry from a search pilot at the time added another layer of mystery. He described seeing a faint column of white fire descending vertically near the presumed disappearance zone, but reported it only in his personal notes out of fear of ridicule. His description matched atmospheric ionization trails sometimes observed during classified aerospace testing. Meanwhile, inside the IL-18, forensic analysts noted that dust patterns on the floor suggested objects had been dragged toward the rear of the cabin, yet the cabin showed no signs of break-in or violent struggle. Instead, subtle compression marks in the fabric of the last 3 rows hinted that someone, or something, had been seated there after the aircraft came to rest, long before it froze over. Thermal residue tests, although degraded, detected pockets of residual warmth inconsistent with the external temperature of the time. These findings resurrected a controversial hypothesis that the IL-18 had been boarded after it disappeared, possibly inspected or manipulated, before being left to be found decades later. The recurring coordinates, the electromagnetic anomalies, the plasma-like damage, all pointed to an intervening force that not only intercepted the aircraft, but continued to monitor it long after the world believed it lost. In 2007, the case took an unexpected turn, when a former communications officer anonymously submitted a bundle of carbon copies, purportedly taken from an Air Defense Command post operating on the night of the disappearance. The documents included several lines of scrambled telemetry, and a handwritten annotation reading, "Intercept unknown, no transition, vanished." Analysts noted that the format resembled early track while scan recordings, and when reconstructed, the data revealed an object descending rapidly from low altitude to over 80 kilometers in less than 60 seconds. More disturbingly, the ascent began precisely where the IL-18 had last broadcast its position. If authentic, the data suggested a vertical extraction impossible for any known aircraft or missile system of the era. Around the same time, Metallurgy experts examining the IL-18's landing gear discovered traces of crystallization typically caused by exposure to extreme pressure differentials. Some concluded that the aircraft's structure had briefly experienced an environment far outside normal flight parameters, possibly a sudden drop or rise in atmospheric density. A surviving passenger manifest, previously dismissed as routine documentation, contained a small anomaly. Next to 3 names was a faint stamp reading, "Priority Clearance," a classification usually reserved for individuals with defense ties. Their families later stated that officials had visited them shortly after the disappearance, telling them not to discuss the flight with anyone, claiming national security reasons. This disclosure strengthened suspicions that the passengers may have been targets rather than casualties. Another compelling clue emerged during reanalysis of onboard wiring. Portions of the electrical harness were subtly warped as though they had been exposed to intense but non-destructive heating. Thermal simulations showed that such deformation could occur only if the aircraft was enveloped in an external heat field, rather than suffering internal fire or mechanical failure. This was consistent with eyewitness reports from a remote weather station operator, who described seeing a sphere of pale gold light hovering silently over the ridge the night of the incident. The operator claimed the light expanded, contracted, and finally shot upward without leaving a trail. His account, initially ignored, perfectly matched harmonic distortions detected in the region's archived radio logs. As these pieces accumulated, a chilling theory gained traction. The IL-18 was not simply intercepted, but selectively influenced, perhaps scanned, examined, or probed by an unknown aerial system. The absence of passengers, the altered metal, the lack of biological remains, and the delayed reappearance all suggested that whatever interacted with the aircraft had capabilities far beyond conventional physics, operating intentionally and with precision. By 2015, the IL-18 investigation had grown into a quiet but active underground research effort, with physicists, retired pilots, and former intelligence analysts comparing evidence across decades. One of the most unsettling breakthroughs came from acoustic specialists, who analyzed distorted sections of the cockpit voice recorder. Though officially too degraded to recover, independent processing extracted faint modulations embedded within the static tones that formed a repeating triad sequence, not produced by human speech or mechanical malfunction. These tones corresponded exactly to electromagnetic pulse signatures recorded during known atmospheric interference events, implying that the crew may have encountered a structured communication signal prior to the loss of control. Meanwhile, a former Soviet radar engineer revealed that his unit detected an object splitting on their scope minutes before the aircraft vanished, one return dropping rapidly, the other rising vertically. He claimed the anomaly was removed from logs by visiting officers and replaced with a notation citing equipment malfunction. His testimony aligned with the handwritten controller note found years earlier referencing to returns. As researchers correlated timelines, environmental readings, and eyewitness accounts, a coherent scenario began to emerge. The IL-18 crossed paths with a non-natural aerial presence capable of manipulating electromagnetic fields, altering the aircraft's trajectory, and interacting directly with matter at the molecular level. The removal of passengers remained the darkest unsolved element. Not a single trace of organic material was discovered. No hair, no skin fragments, no blood, nothing consistent with human remains exposed to the elements for decades. Forensic biologists argued that complete biological absence was impossible unless an external force had sterilized or extracted all organic matter from the interior. The most disturbing discovery came from a set of infrared photographs taken during the 1999 recovery. When enhanced, they revealed faint outlines around several seats, not physical residues.